Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Live from the Heartland show. I'm Michael James here in Chicago, a wonderful city and a wonderful state. And I'm bringing on a wonderful guest, a longtime pal, someone I've known since like the mid-'60s. He's been a very important figure in the world of activism here in Chicago and the world, the one, the only Flint Taylor, who has a very long history as one of Chicago's premier progressive lawyers. It's from the People's Law Office. He's had a lot of cases, the Fred Hampton case, torture cases with the Burge thing. He comes to my class at DePaul. It's good to see you twice in a week and a half, Flint.
It's good. It's good, man. It's good to see you as well.
Tell everybody a little bit about the Hampton case, just because I did mention earlier at the outset of the show, our late, great pal, Marilyn Katz, had passed, and we had her on the show recently writing about teaching the legacy of Fred Hampton in the public schools. And I know that you, off the Burge case, which you'll talk about, also have something being taught in the public schools. Fill us in on Fred, et cetera.
Well, as Marilyn, I'm sure, talked about, Fred Hampton was a unique and powerful leader here in the city of Chicago, leading at the age of 21, the Black Panther Party, to become a very powerful organization working with other radical and revolutionary groups, including Rising Up Angry and Mike James and the folks from Young Lords, the folks from Young Patriots, and other organizations, Weatherman, SDS, and because of his leadership capacities and capabilities, and he just was a great speaker as well, the FBI targeted him along with the local police and the prosecutor at that time, who was none other than Edward V. Hanrahan, a name that will definitely and has definitely gone down in infamy. And on December 4th, 1969, pre-dawn, 14 Chicago police officers under the control of Hanrahan and working with the FBI's COINTELPRO program raided Hampton's apartment. They had a floor plan of where Fred would be sleeping, and they went in, fired 90 to 95 shots out of machine guns and other weapons. To perhaps one that the Panthers fired, and Fred Hampton was murdered in the back bedroom, in all likelihood drugged by an FBI informant provocateur named William O'Neill, who set the whole thing up with the FBI in drawing a floor plan that showed where Fred would be sleeping, who would be in the apartment, and all sorts of other crucial information that the Chicago police raiders under Hanrahan used to effect this assassination.
Well, you were a young lawyer, law student, I think, at the time when that happened, and you got the call and you ended up at the apartment, and the aftermath is history. There is a great book by one of your comrades, and he wrote a book about it, and you also wrote a book where you, in the first chapter, you talk a lot about it. Your book is The Torture Machine, and it's about racism, police violence here in Chicago. And it's a wonderful book. We do use it in the class at DePaul. So people can find out a lot more about Fred. Let me just ask you, Marilyn had suggested that his legacy be taught in the public schools. Why don't you tell us about the Burge case and how that's being taught in the public schools?
Well, a little background. Of course, Burge was a former Vietnam veteran who brought the torture techniques he learned about in Vietnam to Chicago, to the South Side. And they used those techniques, which included electric shock, bagging people, suffocating them, sticking guns in their mouths, mock executions, beatings with rubber hoses, the kind of torture that you would expect, perhaps, and heard about with regard to what happened in South Africa under apartheid and some of the South American authoritarian regimes, but not in this country. But in fact, it was happening for 20 years in Chicago. And based on work that we did as lawyers, bringing this forward, and community activists, and of course, the torture survivors themselves and their families, over a long 35-year period, we were able to uncover the fact that this torture was systemic, that it was racist, it was part of a white supremacist gang in the Chicago Police Department, and that it went all the way up to the mayor, who was Richard Daley, and to the state's attorney of Cook County, who previously to Daley as being mayor, it was Daley at that point as well. So that was the narrative that we were dealing with, moving from, an isolated incident of alleged police brutality to 125, 150 cases of police torture coming under the command of John Burge. Finally, after a lot of struggle and a lot of different permutations around the death penalty, around people in jail, around civil suits, the community in an intergenerational and interracial movement in 2014 and 2015 made a very strong push for reparations with regard to police torture. And that was successful. It compelled Rahm Emanuel, who was mayor at that time, to in fact agree to a set of reparations which were totally unique in this country. And what it included was not only compensation to torture survivors, and not only a torture center, which is up and running on the south side of Chicago, a mayoral apology, but as points towards what Marilyn was talking about, it was also incorporated in these reparations that the torture scandal, the truth about the torture scandal, would be taught to 8th and 10th graders in the Chicago public schools every spring as part of the semester. And that has been going on for several years. There was some pushback, particularly on the northwest and southwest sides, but by and large, it is operative in the CPS. And it has a real impact on young people, many of whom in the communities of color have suffered through similar kinds of wrongful convictions, police brutality. And so it really gives a historical context to it all. So Marilyn was talking about, as I understand it, a similar type of program in the Chicago public schools, or where there would be a section taught about Fred Hampton. And that obviously would be a very important thing to make happen. There's some upheaval now at CPS and at the Chicago Teachers Union, because Brandon Johnson and people working with him and under him at the union have moved over to work with him in the mayor's office. And some of those people were instrumental in the reparations teaching. So there'd have to be some real work and outreach done, which unfortunately, now that we've lost Marilyn, she won't be able to do that. But it's certainly a worthwhile project to try to have a similar type of section taught to students in the CPS about Fred and the Panthers.
That'll be good. Let's just continue. I think we have a number of things that we wanted to talk about, but since you brought up the Burge torture cases, why don't you bring up the situation? There were the Wilson brothers. One of them was a shooter. The other one got put away for 36 years. And there's been a change in that. He's out now. How about talking about that, Burge, et cetera?
Well, the granddaddy case that led to the unpeeling of this onion of torture, well, the Wilson brothers case. And they were charged and arrested for killing 2 white police officers in February of 1982. As it turned out, Andrew Wilson shot both of the officers, while Jackie, the brother, stood by basically in shock. But they were both charged after they were tortured brutally at Area 2. They both, of course, were convicted. Andrew got the death penalty and Jackie got life in prison. And a great deal of legal machinations went on after that. And in a civil case for Andrew, we ended up being the lawyers. And during it, we uncovered much of this evidence that I've been talking about, that it wasn't just Andrew and Jackie that were tortured, but there was a long history of similar types of torture by Burge. Well, Jackie was kind of the forgotten brother. And after he was convicted, he got a new trial. He was convicted again. And the prosecutor who was involved in reconvicting him in 1989 manufactured evidence, because without Andrew standing trial with Jackie, they didn't have the power of guilt by association. So they got a snitch by the name of William Coleman, who was a notorious liar and felon, international. And he falsely claimed that Jackie had made some admissions to him in the jail. They rode that into convicting Jackie again, and he continued to be in prison under the life sentence until 2015, where the Torture Commission gave him a new hearing. We came in to represent him, along with Elliot Schlosser at the Lowy firm, and we got him a new trial. We got his confession suppressed on the basis of torture, and then we went to a third trial. They decided to ride completely on this guy, Coleman, even though he was totally discredited and he had disappeared in England and thought to be dead. Well, the prosecutor who had prosecuted the second trial and dummied up this evidence of Coleman was in fact in touch with Coleman secretly right up until the time of our trial. And that was not known. And this prosecutor, whose name was Drutenko, covered it up. And when he hit the stand in our trial, he committed perjury. And it was so outrageous that the prosecutors who were prosecuting Jackie that third time dismissed the case. And after the prosecutors dismissed the case, we were able to get a certificate of innocence for Jackie. So after some 38 years, 36 of them he spent behind bars, he was not only freed, but he was declared to be innocent of the crimes that his brother committed. We now have a civil suit trying to get back some of the damages for all those years. But most significantly, this guy Drutenko was indicted by a special prosecutor, and he is presently on trial for perjury and obstruction of justice, along with another prosecutor who worked with him in covering up the Coleman piece. And so it's a remarkable story. I'm working on a book, as you know, Michael, that is...
That's what us older guys do, is we write books and photograph.
Yeah. And it deals with prosecutorial corruption. And it starts with the history of Hanrahan, whom I mentioned before, and then goes through all the prosecutors up until Drutenko, who were involved in the cover-up and the prosecution and the torture, because a couple of these prosecutors were in the station house when the torture took place. And Andrew Wilson, they brought to this prosecutor thinking that he was going to give a confession. And they brought him in, and he said, "I ain't going to confess while you're torturing me." And the prosecutor infamously said to Burge, "Get the jag off out of here." And so they took Andrew out and continued to torture him until he agreed to give a statement. So that's where the book goes all the way to Hanrahan, comes through those prosecutors right up to this fellow Drutenko.
So you are doing a new book on prosecutorial misconduct. And let me ask, I think in reading about Drutenko and the perjury trial, I think it was in Lake County. And why is it in Lake County if the torturing was going on here in Chicago?
Well, Chutenko got himself a couple of former prosecutors, real cutthroat guys who are now in private practice as his defense lawyers. And they said they wanted to move the trial because they would be too prejudiced here in Cook County. So there was a compromise that was struck that they would bring in a judge from Lake County. But it was supposed to be tried here, at 26th Street in Chicago. But this judge maneuvered it so that it would be in Rolling Meadows, which is in Cook County, but is, about an hour and a half from here. So it's not being tried in this in the Chicago area, in Chicago, and the judge is not from the Cook County judiciary, which is probably a good thing because 9 out of 10 of those judges are, wired some way or another as former prosecutors and Democratic machine types. But the defense chose to be tried before a judge, as these cops always do. If you remember, when Hanrahan actually got indicted by a special prosecutor, they chose to be tried in front of a judge. And of course, it was a machine judge, and the machine judge threw the case out. That happened with the cops who covered up the Laquan McDonald case. They drew a judge who was a former prosecutor, and they elected to be tried before her rather than a jury. They walked out the door. So they're hoping that this judge will do the same thing. He's a former prosecutor in Lake County. I don't know if what kind of principles he has, but don't be surprised if this guy walks out as well.
Well, we'll have you back on to talk about it if that happens, but let's keep going. I wanted to ask you a couple of other things. We have a new police commissioner or superintendent. Is that what they're called, superintendent?
Yes.
And we have a new one, and we have a new mayor. What do you got on the police department, on the mayor and his administration? Your opinions, your thoughts?
Well, as I worked very hard, and my wife worked very hard, and I'm sure you did too, Michael, for Mayor Johnson's election. We had high hopes, but we also remember how difficult it was for Harold Washington to get the things done that we were hoping he would get done, and it took a long time. I can say that from looking at the police part of it, it's disappointing, to say the least. The superintendent that he appointed was on one of these tactical units back in the 90s and racked up 6 police brutality complaints in a 2.5-year period. So, they bring him out of the ranks, and he was a badass back in the day on the street. They brought in a corporation counsel who is corporation counsel being the head lawyer that handles all the police brutality cases. She has a background with the Daley administration. And Mayor Brown, a very, white collar law firm. And so there hasn't been any movement that I can perceive in terms of changing the culture with regard to the lawyers who fight these cases, getting rid of what Gene Pincham called pinstripe patronage, where they pay private lawyers millions to just fight these cases tooth and nail, even though it's clear that the people were tortured and wrongfully convicted. So that's all disappointing. And the contract has a provision. The police contract has a provision for arbitration, and the history of arbitration with regard to police misconduct is that they normally walk out the door and get their discipline, their firings reversed in a very friendly, secretive arbitrations that are controlled or influenced heavily by the Fraternal Order of Police. So that's 3 strikes. Let's hope it's not, you're out.
Yeah, maybe one was a foul ball still. We'll see. But so there's the contract with the police union, which the president of is kind of a Nazi-esque guy. And no longer on the police force, I don't think. No. But also, when police are brought up on certain charges, um, that's going to get handled in a certain way that's not really in the open. But my understanding was that the mayor did call for separating those two things in front of the city council, which maybe is a little bit of a hope. I did
Yeah.
meet the mayor last week. I mean, I didn't bug him and raise any of this stuff. I just shook his hand and said, keep up the good work. But we'll see what I do next time.
Yeah, really, really. Well, yeah, I heard that as well, that they have separated the two pieces of the contract and that he has a hope that he can swing. It has to be 3/5, I think, of the city council to vote against the piece, the arbitration piece. But I'm not sure that that's a realistic option, given the city council. And although we have a lot of progressive people, including from your ward, Mike, and yeah, but do we have a majority or 3/5? I'm not sure.
Well, we'll see. We'll bring it up next week or as soon as we know. Flint, we do have a couple of minutes left if I stretch it. And one of the things that we know that we discovered that there were some oath keepers, people who were probably at the January 6th insurrection in DC, who these oath keeper members are members of the Chicago Police Department. And we've always known there's been some conservative right-wing types in the police department, as well as some really wonderful people. Let me be clear. What's your take on these oath keepers? And do they think you think people should have a right, no matter what their political views are, to be on the police force?
Well, if you trace that, this is a tremendous expose that the Sun-Times and WBEZ did last week, getting the list of all the oath keepers and Proud Boys and what's the other one? The Legion. Forget the name of it, but three of the most violent white supremacist organizations that had so much to do with the January 6th attack on Congress. And my reading of it is there's a history of this. And I have to also commend the people who did the study, because they took it back to the 60s. And they took it back to the fact that there were some unbelievable Klansmen in the Chicago Police Department in the 60s, including the Grand Wizard of Illinois. And he was organizing and had also and had planned all sorts of violent activities. And I think partly because there was a reform superintendent at that time, they actually rooted these guys out.
Right.
But then you have, and I have to quote my beloved client and friend, Daryl Cannon, a torture survivor, who talked about Burge and all of those white supremacist cops under his command. And his thing was, and what he called Burge and his men, Klan with badges. And so, I mean, you have just a history of white supremacy in the department. I'm sure it goes back farther than the 60s, but we can document it from then until now. And the question, I suppose, I have to say that oath keepers and Klansmen, people who, are on the rolls, that's antithetical to what police are supposed to be about, particularly in a city like this, where there is such a strong and important African American and communities of color. It's just you can't have avowed white supremacists on your police department and have any credibility, if you're trying to have any credibility at all, in the communities of color.
Well, that's going to be my line. I agree with you. I won't talk about anyone's rights to be this or that if they are members of the Klan, et cetera. Once again, Flint has a great book out here called The Torture Machine, and it's about racism and police violence in Chicago. Flint, I always like talking to you. I want to thank you again for coming in and talking to our students. They were very much impressed with you, and you gave a great presentation. I want to get your wife, Pat, to come back on, Pat Hanlon, to talk more about pipelines and native resistance to those. And it won't be long till we'll be celebrating various close friends who have passed away. I know Dennis Cunningham, we're still going to have a celebration for him, I hope. And then, of course, we're going to miss Marilyn Katz a whole lot. I love you, Flint. Thanks for coming on. And, I'll call on you again.
Yes, definitely. And my love to Katie. I miss her from this presentation.
Sometimes co-host.
Yes.